Hello, you guys. So glad that you guys are joining us today. This is going to be an exciting call because we have somebody who is an expert in the whole area of vocabulary development. Now, I know some of you guys are thinking, oh, but Joanne, I seriously do not need to know more about vocabulary. I don't teach vocabulary. I teach math or I teach science or I teach all these other things. But vocabulary is a part of our language. And a lot of our kids, they struggle with being able to learn different concepts. And by having the knowledge that we're going to be learning today to be able to tap on into all of this, you are going to be so excited that you joined us and are able to learn more and do more with each of your students so that they can get the best results that they possibly could get in their education. That's what we all, really strive for. So I have brought in Aaron Daffern here. And he is going to be speaking about his book that he created called Wrestling with Words. Now, you guys, about a month ago, I went to the International Literacy Association's conference in New Orleans with about 6 other tutors that had taken the Reading Interventionist course I created. And one of the sessions that I went to was with Aaron, and he did a presentation with the same name of his book, Wrestling with Words. Now, right before the session, I was in the marketplace and I had bought his book. So I'd already glanced at the notes that he had provided in the app and knew that this guy was presenting gold right from the start. I later found out that he was also a teacher, had been a campus principal and district instructional specialist and curriculum coordinator, and that he had been teaching in Texas since 2000, which, as some of you guys know, that's actually the year I started teaching in the classroom as well. He currently trains schools and districts around the country in student engagement and vocabulary instruction. Woo-hoo. So without further ado, you guys, help me welcome Aaron Daffern. Hey, Aaron.
Hey. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm so glad you're able to join us as well. It's so cool, to be able to. I love being able to connect with people in real life and also online. It's so much fun to be able to do that. So
Sure.
I'm glad that you're able to join us today.
Yeah.
So, Aaron, you started teaching in a school in Texas. What grade did you
Yes.
teach, and what was it like for you?
I taught 4th grade, and it's actually a funny story because I had no interest in teaching when I started.
Really?
My degree was in history and religion. I was going to go to seminary. I had just gotten married, but I needed a job because I needed to do something while I was going to seminary. So a friend of mine at church said, "Hey, you've got a bachelor's degree. You can teach."
Yeah.
Well, how hard could that be, right? So I found a job and took a month of classes. They shoved me in a room of 16 4th graders. We kind of stared at each other, not knowing what was happening. And I just completely fell in love with it. It blew me away, just how interesting the kids were, how challenging it was. So I did 4th grade for a while. I was a teacher for 11 years. And then for the last 8 years, I've been in various administrative positions in charter schools and in districts. But I just fell into it, and I'm so glad I did.
Oh, that's so cool. Now, as a district instructional specialist, what were some of the job requirements that you specifically had?
Yeah, so I work with a team of 5 different specialists, and we work with pre-K teachers, kinder, first, and second. And so one of the things for me, since I work with coaches and the coaches work with teachers, is there has to be a lot of communication that I have to be able to do. I'm coordinating between my department with campus principals, with the executive directors, with so many different things. And I've got to kind of find a way to synergize our support, because anyone that works in a school knows that everyone has their own little pet project, their pet curriculum. Here's the new initiative. And unless you can kind of pull it all together, it seems like everyone's pulling in different places.
Yeah.
And so my job is to work to provide coaching for my coaches so that they can help better work with teachers, but also have the admin side of it, look at follow through, look at documentation, look at support schedules, and just try to grease all the gears so that everything runs smoothly. So we're helping kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, it is not about the teachers' egos. It is all
No.
about the kids that we're serving, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, kids always come first, always.
Awesome. And now we were just chatting beforehand and we were talking about how Wrestling with Words, the book that you wrote that is available on Amazon, you guys, that wasn't actually a book that you had initially even thought of writing.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, so it was about 2.5 years ago, and I was with a charter school, And I just got sick and tired of worksheets. I
Yeah.
hate worksheets. And I really started thinking, well, if you tell teachers stop using worksheets, I've seen principals do that, but then there's this vacuum. They don't know what to do.
Right.
Well, you can't just say stop worksheets unless you replace it with something else.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking, what are some high leverage activities that we can do? So I started thinking about a book I wanted to write, which I'm done with the first draft. It's editing right now. It's called Worksheets Don't Work. And worksheets, and every letter is an acrostic for a different thing you can do. So the W is word work. The
Nice.
O is options, the R is reflection, so on and so forth. So I started researching because I wanted to go to the experts. I didn't want to just Google how do you do vocabulary instruction, because you're going to get really cute ideas on TPT or Pinterest, but it's not. So I went to the actual researchers, and I kept researching about word work.
Mm-hmm.
When I woke up like 3 months later, I realized I had way too much information for a chapter. It was actually a book, because I really started thinking about my own time as a teacher. I wasn't doing vocabulary instruction correctly. If the vocabulary instruction was assigning words, look it up, maybe use it in a sentence, and then test on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found was that in literacy, we know what makes vocabulary instruction work. It just is not really put in a format that teachers can use. It's very much higher level, doctoral level. You have to read a research analysis or someone's dissertation, and teachers want solutions. They just want, what do I do first, second, and third? And so that's when I took a pause on the whole worksheets don't work. And I said, let me see what I can do with this wrestling with words, because I had to make it make sense in my own brain.
Right.
I started thinking other people could use this, because like you said in the intro, everyone teaches vocabulary. It's not just a literacy thing.
Right.
Math, science, and the more that you can chunk into vocabulary word, the more information you can hold in your working memory. Because if, for example, if you know the term antebellum, and when I say that term antebellum, you know that we're talking about pre-Civil War, you know we're talking about the Southern culture, you have all of this working memory that I can add a few other things on top of that. But if I never explain the word antebellum to you, we've got to stop and we've got to flesh that out. You don't have any more space in your brain to kind of pick up anything I was wanting to do with that. Mm-hmm. It made me think, how can we teach vocabulary in a way that kids learn it, they can apply it, they can tweak it, they can play with it, kind of make it their own.
Yeah.
Build their knowledge, and it's fun, and it's not a program, it's not a set of worksheets. And so that's when I just started diving and wrestling with words. Came out about a year later.
Oh my gosh, that is so cool. That is so cool. Yeah, there's also another book. It's called Worksheets Don't Build Dendrites.
Yes. And you know what? Honestly, I started with that book.
Did you?
Yes. I'm sure Dr. Marcia Tate is a fantastic person. I did not like the book. It didn't help me as a teacher.
I just like the title.
She's built a whole empire with that. Everything doesn't build dendrites. I mean, she's gone, but to me, I needed to flex it out a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And so, no, I knew that was a thing. Worksheets don't build dendrites. And to me, when you're looking at that particular book, that was the first book I bought, it's you as a teacher still have to make a big, you still have to flesh it out. It's a general idea, but it's like, okay, what do I do for a 20-minute lesson? It doesn't quite have it. So that was my idea with the Wrestling with Words, and the other book that I'm finishing is how can we make it very practical? Because if you still have to translate from a high level thought theory into what do I do on Wednesday morning at 8:30, that's a lot of teachers aren't gonna have time for that. So a bit more practical.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We're just going to stop and say hello to those friends of mine that are here. And they're all reading tutors. It's so funny. But I know that there are going to be people who are not reading tutors that are going to be watching this as well. So, but first, let's say hello. We've got Patricia in the house. Hello, Patricia, and Lisa, and Ramona, and Beth is in the house, and Kathy. And I see Ashley. Woo, woo. Thanks for joining me, you guys. This is really, really awesome stuff. And Patricia said that she says that she has that book. She has that book. So awesome. I'm not sure which book you're talking about. Are you talking about Aaron's book or the Worksheets Don't Build Dendrites? Could be that one. But you need to get, if you don't have this one yet, you need to get this one. That's for sure. which is awesome. Thank you guys for already starting to introduce yourselves inside of here so that people know who you are. And yeah, I did. And Ashley was with me when I shared afterwards. So the tutors and I, we all got together after the conference, and we were discussing what we were learning, and I shared all about the strategies that you had presented for us during our time together. So Ashley's already gotten to check out the book and some of the strategies, which is fantastic.
Excellent.
Let's add this a little. I want to just dive a little bit into like, how can a tutor that does teach like math or physics benefit from trying out some of the methods that you introduce inside of your book?
Sure. Well, I think most of us can agree upon the fact that vocabulary is important. Whatever content we're dealing with, it always revolves around key academic vocabulary, because that's how knowledge is chunked in our brain. It's tied to a word. But what really got my brain going is when I was doing the research for this, was realizing that there's different phases within vocabulary learning. It's not just a matter of reading a definition and then, filling in a multiple choice test or true false, whatever. It's so the wrestling with words, there's 5 different parts, and a lot of the first 2 parts are really kind of the teacher moves. The last 3 parts are really student moves. So looking at the student moves, rather than just learning a vocabulary word, which is a very broad term, the third part of the process, which is the first student move, is really placing words in context. Everything in our brain is about relationships. It's about creating these, what the research calls semantic webs. If I'm going to give you a new term, you need to hook it on to something you already know. You need to access something that is close to it, and then I need to tie those 2 together. A good visual is, if you've ever been into like a brand new teacher's class and they teach elementary school, and the very first thing that I always look at is I look for hooks or cubbies, because what they don't realize is that you can have the greatest assignment for your very first day of teaching ever, but unless you know what's going to happen with their coats and their backpacks, you're going to have a mess, because they're going to be all over the place. And so what we're doing is we're creating hooks and we're creating cubbies for these new words. If they don't have a place to store these new words, they're just going to slide right down. There's going to be a big jumble on the floor. So the first part is realizing that while we're introducing the words, well, how does it relate to a word that we already know? Is it a synonym? Is it kind of close, but there's a little nuance? Is it something completely new? I'm going to have to build a lot of I'm going to have to build the cubby for you, because you don't have any place to store this. Once we connect those words to something that they know, then we get into the typical processing. And that's going to look a lot like your basic vocabulary activities, maybe some sentences, but there's some analogies. There's a lot of different things you can do to process, to get the kids to really chew on it. But more than that, we know that the kids really know a word when they can tweak it and make it their own, when they're using it in their own vocabulary. And that's the final stages of playing with words. Having fun, whether it be review games, whether it be looking at the different nuances. 6th grade reading teachers, they know when we're talking about connotations and denotations of words, right?
Yeah.
And that's the really fine-tuned stuff. And I think that's where a lot of teachers stop. Once the kids can apply the word in a sentence, then they think, okay, they've learned it. But we haven't really learned a word until we've internalized it, and we can play with it, and we can kind of tweak it and mess with it a little bit and have fun with it and enjoy the word learning. So to me, the big aha was vocabulary learning is going to be in stages. You place the word in context, you process the words, and then your spiral review is you're constantly playing with the words. And it is fine to have fun, because positive emotions, they build more memory tags. So kids are going to remember what they have fun with. So, I mean, if you can have tons of fun with words, but what they're doing is you're building it. You're building their stamina to be able to use it in new and unique situations.
Yeah. And absolutely anybody can benefit from that process.
Yes.
Depending, no matter what it is that they teach. We've got a math teacher in here. So Beverly Mackey is in the house. She focuses on math, but she knows that she's going to be able to apply this to the students that she works with. And you absolutely can. So I'm glad that you decided to join us today, Beverly. Awesome. And I want to let you guys know as well, I want to make this applicable to all of you that are listening. So feel free to add any questions that you have inside of the chat. I would love to have Aaron answer them as we go along. And if you like these types of interviews and you want to see more of them, just click that like button and subscribe. All right. So personally, I feel that every tutor needs to read your Appendix 3. Because it not only is helpful for reading tutors, but tutors that tutor anything. So you share in Appendix 3, how memory and motivation work. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. And what I was talking to you about earlier is that this is my third book. And really, I got started being interested in writing books when I really started looking at student motivation, right? What motivates kids to learn? Because as an educator, I knew that I can motivate kids, and my kids never had a problem with engagement. We just had fun. I didn't know what I was doing. We just had a lot of fun, and my class was always enjoyable. It's when I became an administrator and I started doing some walkthroughs, and I started thinking about, okay, these teachers aren't really engaging their kids, and why is that? And how can I teach you? I can't, if you're not going to be loud and boisterous and have humor like I use, that's fine, because other teachers can engage their kids and they're quiet and they never really raise their voice, but they hold the class in the palm of their hands. Mm-hmm. So I really started thinking about what is engagement, what motivates students to learn. So that's how I got started years ago. And then everything I see now is always through that filter of the 5 major facets of motivation, right? The competence, relationships, autonomy, value, and emotions. That's what get kids hooked. So my instruction needs to be leveraging what kids naturally want to do in order to learn. Mm-hmm. And I think it would be really irresponsible for anybody to put anything out now without taking a look at what we know about brain research, right? Eric Jensen started years ago, that we mentioned Dr. Marcia Tate's worksheets don't grow dendrites. We know how our students form memories. We know what it takes because we have fMRIs, we have all kinds of neuroscience, and teachers have to really leverage that. Now, you don't have to be a neuroscientist, you don't have to be looking at brain scans, but if you're reading some type of pedagogy or anything that teaches you how to do something with kids and it doesn't reflect that, then it's really out of date. So even though if you're just reading the actual book itself, it's not going to really get into that. I wanted anyone that does climb into the appendices to realize that it is current because it lines up with, this is how we make memories. Because at the end of the day, we want kids to remember it.
Exactly.
Just think of that that old adage of, if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, does it make a noise? My thought, if a teacher teaches, but no one remembers it, do they ever really teach? Right. It doesn't really matter what you do as a teacher. It matters what they remember. Mm-hmm. And teachers, they make the mistake of saying, oh, I covered that, which I hate that word covering. We don't cover things, we teach things, but it really doesn't matter what you teach. It matters what they learned. Yes. And if what the students do doesn't reflect that you taught anything, then you as a teacher can't tell me that you taught it. I'm looking at the student results. So then if that's the case, it doesn't matter what you do, it matters how their brains make meaning. And that's where all of our neuroscience and all the advances we made in the last 10, 15 years, we've got to be able to leverage that.
Yeah, for sure. And I love the section that you have here on like the repeated exposures. And
yes.
Obviously every kid is different on how many exposures they need. And we kind of get to feel that when we're doing the tutoring process.
Sure.
Of how many exposures do they need? But I'm just going to read this to you guys because this is so cool. It's such a great visual for you guys to see it. So a simple way, he says, to explain this to students would be to take a short walk outside, walk through a grassy area in a single file, and then look back on the path you took. Ask students if they can see a trail marked by their passing feet. The students will probably notice the grass flattened a bit and could retrace their steps if needed. Then tell them that what they are seeing is like working memory. It can keep something only for a little while before disappearing. Bring the class back out the next day and ask them if they can find their trail. The evidence of their passing will have disappeared and they would have to start over again. At this point, the teacher can ask a hypothetical question. I know that we walked a path yesterday, but we can't find it today. What do you think would happen if we walked the same path every day for 10 days, 50 days, 100 days? Students should picture a trail beginning to emerge because of the regular use. By the 100th day, the grass itself might be worn down to bare earth. This then is similar to how learning can be strengthened. Repeated exposures to content will result in more noticeable neural pathways and make the content easier to remember when called upon. Yeah, and lots of kids have that, they have that question of, why are we continuing to do the same thing over and over?
Yeah. Well, and a key for that is, this is information the kids need to know how their brains work. You don't necessarily need to get dendrites or myelin sheath, or you don't have to use high level stuff.
Right.
But use something as simple as that, because that empowers them. That gives them agency, so they feel like, you know what, I can make myself smarter if I practice this. And there's a reason we do spiral review, and the reason we integrate cross-curricular content, so they're getting something in multiple perspectives. We know why we're doing it, but if they know why they're doing it, it's going to motivate some of them to really push through when it gets kind of difficult, because they see their brains growing smarter. They feel they're in charge of their own learning.
Yeah. One thing I have found is that some of my kids, they've been repeating the same thing over and over again incorrectly. And there's almost like that backwards effect that we have to have. Like, now it's going to take me longer, more repeated, at the older that they get, because I specifically do reading tutoring. The older that they get, I find that it is harder to retrain their brain and that pathway that's been created in their mind, because they've been repeating it incorrectly over and over and over again.
When you see that a lot with students that are struggling readers and they don't have a solid foundation in phonics, and they've learned some coping strategies like guessing, using context, but if you ask them to sound out individual phonemes, they can't quite do it. But you're right, they found a way to get by guessing. They see the initial letter, they see the final letter, and they make a guess based on context. And when push comes to shove, if they don't have that solid foundation, you're right, you're gonna have to unlearn them a little bit and kind of break it down until you can build them back up. Every day, if you want them to learn the correct thing, you're gonna have to be very intentional. But and then if you don't, you're gonna have to spend more time breaking it down to teach them how to read correctly or how to do a mathematical procedure correctly.
Yeah, and so that's the beauty of what we get to do, you guys.
Yes.
We are almost like we're almost like doctors of the brain. Like we're rewiring the pathways up there, so that kids can really get it, understand it, apply it, and do whatever it is that we are teaching them. And this all kind of comes back onto that vocabulary, because everything we do really is all about that vocabulary. So so tell us about how motivation then affects vocabulary acquisition.
Well, one thing that I really noticed was, if a kid's not interested, if they're not engaged, they're not learning. And the reason I did all the research on what motivates kids to learn was because some teachers were doing a dog and pony show and a dancing bear, and they were dressing up and dancing and all kinds of business, and it would work, but then sometimes it wouldn't. And so when we were looking at engagement, I realized that there's 5 different factors. It's the CRAVE, and I mentioned them earlier: competence, relationships, autonomy, value, and emotions. And every kid's kind of has their own profile. Like if you did a personality test like Myers-Briggs, right? You're not going to be just one thing. You're going to be a mixture of all 4, some peaks and some valleys. Same thing with student engagement. It shouldn't be a complete mystery. It shouldn't be one of these things where you spray and pray. You come up with something and you think it's going to work, and then it doesn't, and you go back and you're reflecting, why did that lesson work in 2nd period, but it didn't work in 6th period? The thing that changed was the students changed. If your lesson delivery was exactly the same, or same with if you're tutoring one-on-one, you could do the exact same process and it works for 5 kids, but it doesn't work for the 6th kid. You're trying to figure out, why am I not engaging them? Why are we not making that connection? And that's where you have to kind of realize, well, these 5 things motivate kids. And vocabulary, whether it be teaching them how to do an algorithm or apply, some kind of inferencing skills to a reading passage, they have to connect to it first. Rather than just hoping and praying that they connect to it, if you know what gets them motivated, competence is feeling like they have the ability to succeed. Relationship is the one-on-one connection. With you, with the text. The autonomy is choices. Everyone likes feeling like they're in control of what they're doing. The value is the relevancy. If it's not relevant to what they're doing, then they're going to disengage. And then the emotions, that's the biggest part, because if kids are not, or if they're emotionally disconnected, or if they're hijacked by their amygdala and they're in a fight, flight, or freeze, they're not going to be able to engage with anything. So as educators, we have to marry what we know is good instructional design, whether it be vocabulary, whether it be anything, plus what does it take for the kids to engage, what motivates them to learn, and then what are good vocabulary practices. So many times we start with what we want to do, but we start with what the students need. Just like if you're working with a student in reading and they're just learning to read, you're going to do a reading diagnostic to kind of figure out, is their problem fluency? Is it accuracy? Is it comprehension? Can they do surface level but not inferencing? Same thing with motivation. You can kind of figure out what is it that takes them to connect. Some kids really need that one-on-one connection with the principal or the tutor, the teacher, whatever. And some kids, they don't really need you to be their best friend. They just want to have fun. And if you have fun, then you've got them. Other kids, they just want to feel successful. And the second they don't feel successful, they have more of a fixed mindset, it just shuts them down. So they have to really see their success visibly. And so I find it's helpful with vocabulary instruction, with any kind of instruction. You have to know what the other part of the equation is. I call it the hidden factor, because engagement is instructional design. That's what we do, right? As tutors, as educators, as curriculum developers, we design instruction. We know what research says, but the other half is student motivation. If we marry instructional design with student motivation, that's what makes engagement.
Yes.
Learning is done by the student. It's not done to the student. You don't learn at a student. They have to engage. So you've got to take what you know, marry it with what they need. That's where the magic happens. And the more we can get our 30 years of social cognitive research, our science to let us know what do students need, it's going to be less guesswork and more surgical into how we get kids to buy into what we're doing.
I know some of you guys are geeking out as much as I am here, because this is just awesome stuff. Because this is exactly what I teach in the reading interventionist program that I created, where we start with that assessment and then we figure out exactly what it is that the kid needs, and then we focus that, like the stuff that the kids don't already have. We don't need to focus on that. Let's focus on the things that are going to close the gap the quickest for them, so that they can have the best results that they possibly can. And I love how I don't know how many other people caught this, but he used the acronym CRAVE to remember each of those steps of motivation.
We want students to crave learning, yes.
We want them to crave learning. Such a great play on words, by the way. Did you come up with this all on your own? Yeah, that's my initial book. It took me quite a while, and no one would want to read the first 3 or 4 drafts. It was horrible, because with wrestling with words, with my student engagement stuff, it has to be accessible. I want any teacher to be able to pick it up and make sense. Yeah.
And this high level research, how does just a first year teacher, someone that might be alternatively certified, how does it make sense to them? How does it have a strong research basis, but it's applicable to someone that just needs, I need to get this kid to plug in. What do I do? And a lot of times you get one or the other. You get these high level research studies that you go to at conferences, but you're like, this is crazy. No one understands. I need a degree just to listen to you.
Right.
Or you get the other end where it's 20 hacks that you get from teachers that might have been great and fun, but it's not based on research. It's based on their specific circumstance. And it only works if you have their personality with their student demographics in their region of the United States. Like there's no, I didn't find a middle ground. And that's when I was like, you know what, I might as well write it myself. If no one's going to do it, I'll put it out there.
I love it. Now, Debbie Castles, she says that she teaches vocabulary for test prep, and they need to learn tons of advanced vocabulary, unrelated words, especially for the GRA. Any suggestions for a teaching strategy for that in particular?
Yeah, the key with that is, especially when you're doing SAT, ACT, GRE, is you have a lot of vocabulary, and unless it's connected to something they already know, then they're going to be able to do analogies, but they're not going to be able to do those fine-tuned analogies. I'm sure you're already using like the structures, the analogous thinking, like what's the relationship? But in order for them to have that deep understanding, You've got to take those words, and if you're operating off like an existing list, you've got to flesh those words out, and you have to put them in much bigger context than they might ever see on the test. But that's how it's relating, placing the words in context puts it within the semantic web of this word is related to all these other words. Mm-hmm. Most of it is just verbal. It doesn't have to be any kind of written exam or any kind of assignment. Just talking about words. How is this word like another, but how is it kind of dissimilar? And there's some activities in the book, some ideas like a synonym web or synonym continuum. So you take a word, you find some synonyms and some antonyms, but then you kind of put it on a continuum, and you're looking at grades of, if you're looking at hot, warm, scorching, like how would you rate those on a scale, and how would you differentiate? And it's those conversations that you're having about those words, that's what's building the connections, right? Mm-hmm. So if you were to put tepid in the middle and scorching on one end and freezing on the other end, what are some words that you would put like in between those, and how would you make the decision to place, hot is a little bit more than warm, but it's a little bit less than scorching. Anytime you just need to talk about everything. It's all vocabulary acquisition is language development, and you're talking about it and you're building those neural connections. So I think, to answer your question in a very long and rambling way, I think a lot of times we do ourselves a disservice because we're so focused on, maybe not so much with reading, but your typical teacher, they're focused on getting a grade. And they want to put something that I can quantify. You got 7 out of 8 correct. It's the conversations you're having about the words. That's where the real learning happens. Yes. And if I never watch it for a grade book, then that's fine. I can get a grade somewhere else, even if it's a participation grade. But it's the level conversations. And if they don't have it, then that's where you provide the stems with vocabulary to provide them the ability to start using those terms. And there's different ways to kind of define the words and to play with the words and process it. So in the book, the processing that's really the meat of what you're doing. You're chewing on it, but it looks at different learning styles. So I use the mastery, the understanding, the self-expressive, and the interpersonal. It's not my stuff. I wish it was, because it's fantastic. It's from The Strategic Teacher by Silver, Strong, and Perini. It's put out by ASCD. And it's just a different way of looking at how students process words, whether it be like fill in the blank, whether it be talking with a friend, whether it be being very creative, or whether it be, more of understanding the, Latin roots or Greek words. There's so many different ways to approach words. Mm-hmm. You have to use all of it. You have to give them that real well-rounded. And if you use that particular thing that you'll see in the book, you realize that most teachers, they end up teaching the way they learn. So if you're a mastery learner, then you are very focused on right, wrong, black, white, fill in the blank. You love math because there's always a right answer. If you're more of an interpersonal, you're probably going to lean more towards the relationships and the literature, because you love the human element, right? You love the diving into the human condition and the stories and the plays and the characters. And that's great, but you're going to miss, but some of your students that are more mastery, black and white, they might not connect with you so much. So one book of vocabulary is, don't teach just the way you learn. You've got that down. Try to flesh your teaching out with the other ways that students learn, the interpersonal, the self-expressive, the mastery, the understanding. It's just different filters of accessing information. Because I think unless we're really very metacognitive about stepping outside ourselves, we approach teaching just the way we learn. And the way I learn is such and such. So I just am going to teach it that way. Yeah. And that teaching style doesn't match up with the student's learning style.
Yeah, and you mentioned some learning styles that, I don't think that as tutors we're super familiar with in the past. We've heard about, the hands-on learner, the visual learner,
sure,
right?
The kinesthetic, visual, auditory.
Yeah. But you talk about some different types of learners and the kinds of activities that they enjoy doing when they learn. So can we slow down on that concept a little bit and dive a little deeper into that?
Sure.
So tell us about the different types of learners again, and what they are.
Yeah, okay. And so just I want to make sure I give credit to where credit is due. There's a book called The Strategic Teacher, published by AD, and it changed my world when I was a principal, because it really made me think of learners, because you're right, the only way I'd ever classified learners was that auditory, visual, kinesthetic. They classified as the mastery, understanding, self-expressive, and interpersonal. And on my website, aarondaffern.com/inventories, I created some inventories, because I really dive into this with my first few books. So you can take some inventories and have some kids take some inventories to see what kind of learners are they. So in brief, your mastery learner that's really what your traditional education system is built for them. There's right answers, there's wrong answers. Follow the sequence, follow the algorithm, and you will be able to move in lockstep. So traditionally, most of our I call those learners the bowheads in a loving way. I picture them as the little girl that's wearing her Easter dress on the first day of school with a big gigantic bow in her head. And she has 3 sharpened pencils and a notepad and her hand up before the bell is even rung. Like those type of learners that they love the worksheets, they love filling things out. They're the students that remind the teacher that they forgot to assign the homework, that you just want to strangle, because they love it, because they're building their competence. And as long as they're seeing that they're growing, then they love it. Traditional school is built for them. The interpersonal, those are more of, I call them the stalkers, because those in elementary school, those are the kids that bring you a flower from recess every single day for like 177 straight days. When they're 13, they try to friend you on Facebook. When they're 18, they know more about your family than you've ever shared with anyone, because they just need you. They need that interpersonal connection. And so they don't care about what's right or what's wrong. They want to know about you. Or if you're a literature teacher or history teacher, what's the story? How do I connect with what's going on? And so you've got to make that connection either personally with a peer or with whatever content you're dealing with. And the third part would be the understanding. And that's me personally, that's when it really was an aha, because I'm more of an understanding. The mastery learner wants to know what's the answer. Interpersonal wants to know who are we talking about. Understanding is why. I don't care what the answer is. Why is that true? Why does gravity work? Why do like poles repel on magnets? And they always want to dive deep. So they love logic, they love debates, they love going back and forth. And then the fourth is more of the self-expressive. So they're the what if, and they're the oddballs. They're always flipping everything all over the place. Their backpack looks like it just vomited papers, right? Everything is very artistic and out of the box thinking, right? And
that's me.
Yeah. And so those students paired up with mastery teachers, sometimes it's bad news, and because they're not matching what the students need. And so it really made me kind of aware of how I prefer to learn, how I prefer to teach. And I started seeing, oh, this is why this student feels like the teacher hates her. The teacher doesn't hate her. The teacher's just more of a mastery learner. And the student is an interpersonal learner. They want to love on the teacher, and the teacher is very, very distant, very right, wrong. This is how you do it. And so once I got that schema in my mind, I can't unsee it. And so everything I do now is always through those 4 filters. Get into the wrestling with words. I vary the different processing tasks for mastery processing tasks, interpersonal, understanding, and your self-expressive, because you've got to vary things up. You never want to like pigeonhole a kid and say, oh, you're a mastery learner, I'm just going to give you fill in the blanks. That might be the preferred learning style, but reality is they're going to have to learn all 4 different ways. How can you stretch them, and you can give them some tasks that might be out of their comfort zone, and realize you're going to have to scaffold them a little bit. And to me, building a well-rounded vocabulary program is going to realize that you've got to do more than just fill in the blank. You have to do more than just, creating a picture. You have to kind of see the big picture. Like once you have the whole system in place, then you can fill in the blanks. And that's what I never really got doing my research for this book, was I never got the whole picture, beginning to end. What does a good vocabulary program look like? Unless you pay, someone will sell you something, and it's an online something, and you plug the kids in and it does it for you. But I needed to see it from beginning, from preparing all the way to what the researchers call word consciousness, to where they're seeing words, they're playing with words, and that they love adapting things. And then how can teachers do it on their own without having to, fork out $100 to buy this prepackaged kit that may or may not work with what their kids need?
Yeah, absolutely. And Patricia said that she's already picked up now the Kindle version of your book, and she can't wait to start reading.
Excellent.
Kathy is curious to know if you have it on Audible yet.
I do not have it on Audible yet. That would be something to look at. But no audiobook yet.
Nope, sorry, you're gonna have to read the book, Kathy.
Yes.
No shortcut here. And I always tell my teachers, the tutors, I said, I have this like way of processing books. So I like to buy a book on like Audible and kind of like preview it. Like I'm like half listening to it, right? Like I'm not really like all in, right? But then like I start hearing like some of these little like trigger things, and I'm like, oh, that's gold. Ooh, that's gold. And then all of a sudden I'm like, I need to buy this one because I need to like write all over this book, and I need to highlight, and I need to like, I like really get like, once I go through that preview process. So
yeah,
I'm sure Kathy just wants to go through that process so that she can get excited. But I'm telling you, Kathy, you don't even have to listen to it to get that excited to write all over it. I've written all over mine, and I'm like, yeah, this is good. This is so good. And it's based off of research. And that's what I really appreciated as I was going through this. And a lot of the strategies that you have talked about inside of this book, it's not necessarily that they're new. They were based off of research. They're just all in one place, right? And this is what makes it such a valuable resource. So awesome. I'm so glad that you decided to write this book, because we don't have to buy a curriculum in order to be good at teaching vocabulary.
Yeah.
Right? We just need to know what strategies work, and then
what's the
them
framework
with our students, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's exactly what the Reading Interventionist program, for those of you, there's only 2 days left. For those of you that do want to join, I'm going to be sending a link later on. I'll put it in the description. But for those of you that want to join the Reading Interventionist program, there's only 2 days left. I close the doors tomorrow night at midnight. And we do go over what are the best resources and tools to be able to use online with your students? How do you actually go about that? What does a lesson look like when you're teaching online? And we include a lot of the strategies that Aaron includes inside of this book. And so this is really, really great information. What I love about working with kids online, Aaron, is that I could just ask the kids, like I teach them that 0, 1, 2, 3, the 1, 2, 3, 4 strategy of, I've never heard of it. I've heard of it. I've heard of it and I understand it, or I can use it in a sentence. To that highest level, I've heard of it. I understand. I can use it in multiple different situations. I use that with my students, and I teach that to them, and they're able to tell me like right off the bat, this is a 1 for me. This is a 2 for me. And I like categorize all of the words to find out before we read a book. Okay, here are the words that we need to focus on.
Yeah.
And so I'll take those ones that are like the 2s and the 1s, and I'll pick a handful of those to focus on, and then we talk about those words and introduce them.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, that word knowledge scale, it has so many abilities, possibilities of motivating the kids, because once again, going back to the student motivation, they love building their competence. So if they marked it as a 1 at the beginning of your unit or your lesson cycle, and then you do a little post test and they're a 3, they see themselves growing, and they start taking ownership of, I can become smarter because look, I was a 1, now I'm a 3. And then that's also a good way to sometimes give some autonomy in there, because you might say, these are 4 words everyone has to learn, and from these other 5 words, I want you to pick 3. And if you already really know the word, don't worry about it. You've already got that. So kids they get a little bit of ownership of what they're learning, and anytime you can build that into it, it's going to be helpful for them to see their competence grow and give them some choices.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you taught us a really cool strategy for introducing vocabulary using the ABCDEFG method.
Yes.
And again, that's another acronym that you have for what are the components that we need to include when we're thinking about how to introduce a word. And you don't have to use all of them, but can you tell us about that strategy?
Sure. So I just call it the ABCs, and it's really how I got started, because when I would just look at research, how do you teach vocabulary? There's always a go-to, right? Use your context clues, right? If a teacher doesn't know what to do, use the context clues. But that doesn't work, because what if there is no context clues? Because an authentic text, you're not always going to have a good context clue. In test prep passages, perhaps. But then what are some other things? So what I found were there were 7 different things. So if you just go through the first 7 letters of the alphabet, A is activating background knowledge, right? So if you're talking about something, you already know what it is, but we just haven't used this term yet. So I'm going to paint this picture for you, and then I'm going to slap that new label on. And so you already know what this is. We're just going to call it this. Now I've got a place to hook it because you already know the content. If it's brand new content, I'm gonna have to do a little bit more work. But if they already know really what you're talking about, they just haven't used that particular term, use background knowledge. The B is for bases or affixes. And if you ever teach older students, you get into Greek and Latin roots, you know there's so much value there. And you can start using base words to spread out to other words. So if there are some good prefixes, suffix, or base words, use those. But it's not always there. Use it if you can. The C is the context clues. But to me, that's what most teachers, that's their go-to. I would caution, be careful. If it's not very obvious, if you got to go like 5 pages back and you have to do really deep inferential thinking to make this very thin connection, don't. It's either there or it's not. But if there is a good context clue, either before or after the word, use it because you're teaching them word attack skills. The D would be the descriptive definition. And I love just that term descriptive definition, because if someone were to say, you know, what does the term antebellum, I used that earlier, what does that mean? I wouldn't go straight to the dictionary definition. If it was a friend asking, I'd say, well, antebellum is kind of like, and you have this little conversation where you're kind of describing it, you're kind of putting some meat around it. That's what a descriptive definition is. Going and looking up, you know, a definition, like if a kid were to say, what does the word continually mean? And you say, well, look it up. And then the definition says the act of being, you know, continued. Well, that doesn't do them any good if new definition includes the same, right? You have to go on the scavenger hunt. Just definitions using basic words, right? So the E would be examples, non-examples. Sometimes it's there. Like if you don't know what a pinafore is, but if you're like, it's kind of like an apron or it's kind of like a smock, you're giving an example and you can visualize that, right? The F is like a friendly word because really it's a synonym, but a lot of times in the younger grades, before we get to the academic vocabulary of synonym and antonym, we'll teach the concept of it's a friendly word. So that's what the F is. And if, once again, it's kind of like the background knowledge. If you already know what it is, it's a synonym for this, then you can use that to kind of define it, but it also gives you really good opportunities because a synonym is not a definition. They're similar, but they're not exactly the same. So you can get nuances between it's kind of like this, but it's not exactly like this. And the G is the grammar usage. For students to really develop that word attack skill, because 90% of any words they learn is not going to come from vocabulary program. It's going to be from wide reading. But do they know, you know, that the ly suffix means you're dealing with an adverb? Do they know what inflectional endings are? Do they know what it means if it's an adjective versus a noun versus a preposition? So just really getting into those mechanics, I know this is an adverb because if the grammar usage is going to be helpful, use it. Once again, if not, you know, don't necessarily use it. But there's so many different ways to attack a word rather than this is what it means.
Yeah, and there was an activity inside of your book that did that too. Like you could actually take a look at what are the different forms of this word, like how is it used as a noun, how is it used as a verb, as an adverb, as an adjective.
Yes.
And so then I ended up finding this really cool tool, and I was so excited because I was like, oh, well, this would be really useful. It's called WordHippo. I don't know if you've ever
No, what is it?
It's an app. So all you have to do is you type in the word and then you can choose, do you want it to give you, so it does have like the dictionary definition or examples, but then it also will break it down into what is the adverb of that root word? What is the verb? What is the adjective? You could just type it on in and search it and there it is. And so it would be a really great tool to be able to use to kind of build on that knowledge, that language, and expand upon it.
Well, yeah, because if you spent some time talking to students about the word careful, you would hope if they run across the word carefully that they would be able to apply, but sometimes you have to explicitly teach that carefully are related. The ly just changes it to an adverb. And so good opportunities to, you know, to explore and expand. One good base word might teach you 5 or 6 related terms.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you also taught that once kids are introduced to the word, that you have them interact with the word. What are some ways that tutors could interact with the words with their students?
Well, one of the things we do is just basic word association. So when I say this, what does this make you think of? And you might list some terms, and you're just having some conversations, and that's really placing the words in content before we really get into the nitty gritty of this is the definition of just listing some associated terms. So one of the games we played was like talk a mile a minute, and so we took a target term, and you had 1 minute to list as many related associated terms as you could. And then we had a discussion of what was the most common term that everyone had, and what was one that was kind of unique, and really taking those teachable moments. If they throw you a curveball and you say, we're going to learn, if it's young child, we're going to learn about Halloween. And you're like, what do you think of Halloween? And they give you a term like black. Rather than saying, no, when I think of Halloween, I think of holiday or pumpkin. Explore that. I say, what do you mean by black? And they're thinking of maybe a black cat, or maybe they're thinking of some black crepe paper that they've seen for decorations. And maybe that word really is related. They just kind of got there through a sort of meandering path. And so it's really exploring what are some associated terms. And because every time you're doing that, you're walking down that path again. You're cementing that path.
Mm-hmm.
To keep in mind is if it's brand new, if you're saying we're going to learn about metamorphosis, what does that mean to you? And if they've never seen that concept, then you're going to have to do a lot of scaffolding, because if there's nothing there, there's nothing there. But if it's a related term, build those connections. And if it's kind of a thin connection, push them on that, because that's where the meat comes, is figuring out why did they make that association, and maybe they just don't know. They just don't know a word to kind of link the two terms. And so you can do that for them.
Yeah. And one of the things that I realized with my own teaching, like after I was sitting there, I love being able to evaluate what it is that I do and how I could do it better. And when I was sitting in that room, I remember thinking to myself, one of the areas where I've been dropping the ball lately with my students is revisiting our words and playing with them and doing some different things with them, even after we no longer need the words in order to be able to understand the text that we're going to be reading. But once in a while, just kind of throwing that in as something fun to do. So what are some ways that they could just play with the words and have fun with them?
Yeah, so that's a really great way to kind of get your spiral review, because we've all probably faced a situation where we taught something in August, we didn't revisit again, it comes up on a test in April, and they look at you like you never talked about it. Like if you use it, you're going to lose it.
Yes.
Really where that final component, the play is, and it's just like a spiral review. I mean, it could be basic games like memory. You could do made, you can do charades, you can do Pictionary. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate. But you can just take some words that you've used, write them on slips of paper, keep them in a fishbowl. And if you've got like 5 minutes before the end of a session, or maybe if you're a teacher, 5 minutes before the end of class, it's a real quick sponge activity. Pull out a word, make sure it's a word you've already covered, you feel like they have a pretty good idea of, and say, all right, get with a partner and give me 3 terms that are related to this. Or, I'll give you 10 seconds of think time. And how would you use this in a sentence? Or I've got 3 words, and then put them in a scenario. If you were having a conversation with your mom at dinner tonight, which of these 3 words would you be most likely to use, and why? And then thinking, well, I would never use these terms, but if we were talking about this. And so they're just kind of putting it in new and unique situations. There's no right or wrong answer. You're not taking it for a grade. You're just continually flexing those muscles of putting all those terms in new and unique situations. Because once they own it, once they have it, then it's theirs. And so you might say, all right, we've got these 5 words. Ask your partner a question using 2 terms in the same question. See if you can do it in 1 sentence, or create, describe what's happening, in this picture using 2 vocabulary words, and all keeping that up and flexing together, and you're never going to know what kind of combinations you're going to get. So that's really where you take your terms that you think, okay, we've done that, we're finished with that, put that into that rotation. So they'll love it because there's that air of mystery. You never know what it's going to be. The students can choose. And so it could be a real quick, if you're doing some online tutoring, like before we sign off, hey, here's one of the words, you pick one and, give it to me in a question, or pretend you're mad at your brother and scream at him and use this term in what he did wrong or something like that. Possibilities are endless. It's just a matter of giving them a little bit of a context and say, just give me something.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. I love it. I was like, all of a sudden I'm like, okay, we need to like write down all these ideas. Did you guys write that down? If not, you're gonna have to listen to the replay there.
Yeah, because that's not in the book. We're just making that up as we go along.
Yeah, exactly. So Ashley said these would even be great for like a warm up, or like you said, like you said, and she said at the end of a session too, because we do often have like 2 or 3 minutes like that are left, and you're like, okay, so what do I do now? Right. And so if you're at that position, take some of those words that you have worked on in the past and do something with them. You could even keep a list inside of one of their, a PowerPoint that you keep inside of their folder that you just pull that on up, open it up. And now you've got access to every single word that you guys have ever chatted about. And you can just say, hey, out of these 3 words, choose one that you can use in this context. I mean, it's real simple. It doesn't have to be complicated.
Exactly.
It's just to get them using the words on an ongoing basis, because once the kids start using the words, they're now cementing the words.
And especially in they're going to learn the words initially within content, right? You're talking about math, you're talking about this type of reading strategy with informational text, but can we use it in just a normal conversation, or in a hypothetical situation when you're at the park and you see a hot dog seller and you want a hot dog? If you can use these terms in a different context, that's when you really start to own the word. It's when it's left in a very specific context to where the kids struggle with it if they see it in a new situation. Or if we went back to like the vocabulary with GRE, right? Mm-hmm. Your basic analogies you see with SAT, ACT, or GRE, there is no context. Mm-hmm. They just say green is to grass as red is to whatever. Like it has no context. And so they have to really be able to think about it on its own, because if it stays within that specific context, that unit, they don't know that term can be used in other areas. So that's where you have to really kind of just keep it going.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, such gold, you guys. I hope you guys have gotten as much value out of this today as I have gotten. I absolutely love talking about anything reading related, and this is phenomenal information. Some of you guys have already started checking out the book and grabbing it, Wrestling with Words. It's on Kindle. It's on, you can get the hard copy on Amazon. And so definitely check it out. It's awesome. So thank you for sharing your valuable time with us today.
My pleasure.
And sharing with us these great resources and tools. I appreciate it. If people want to be able to learn more about you and what you do, what is your website again?
It's just my name, aarondaffern.com. That's AARON and then DAFFERN.com. And so I've got, I've got more information. Like we mentioned at the beginning, I do training at schools. Like if you have people that are connected with, this would be great and then maybe you're not teaching at a school, but your kids go to a school. I wish my teachers would hear this. I've got information on there about student engagement training, vocabulary training, and just me personally, I hate when you want to think about a training and you have to click 5 times, submit your phone number, your email to get a quote, and you get hooked into this. All the prices, it's all on the website. You don't have to submit all kinds of personal information to figure out how much it would cost. All the trainings include a copy of the book and a training manual. There's no hidden fees. So just get on there and look, what does it cost? Can we do it? Yes or no? You can make this yourself before you have to submit all this information and get me to spam your inbox. I hate that stuff. So all that information is up there, and I can connect with anybody if you have any specific needs, or if you want to tweak it, like, well, if we did this, or what would it take to do this? We can always adapt it.
Awesome. You are incredible. I've already started sharing you with my reading specialist friends that are still in the school system. So
great. Thank you.
Who knows? Maybe you'll get a call from one of them.
And we can all thank this YouTube Live. That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you again so much. I appreciate it. And thank you guys for joining us. And I know that some of you have already said that you're going to be watching this again and taking careful notes. Awesome.
Yeah. All right.
Well,
Thank
thank
you,
you
Joanne.
so much. And it was wonderful getting to see you again.
Yes, great to see you.
All right. Enjoy the rest of your day,
All
everyone.
right. Thank you.